Paul Ehrlich, American, author of The Population Bomb. Aurelio PECCEI, Italian, industrialist, head of the Club of Rome and ecological movement. ILLICH, a priest living in Mexico concerned with the problems of the Third World. David Brower, American, a conservationist, president of the Friends of the Earth. All four men concerned with ecology, but with different preoccupations, different philosophies. The Maison de la Recherche invited them to Paris to talk.
Of course, when the ecologist thinks about resource problems, the first problem he thinks of course, is food, the most important resource. The most optimistic people about our ability to continue to feed the world are those responsible for the Green Revolution. You may recall that when Norman Borlaug gave his Nobel address, he said maybe it'll buy us 10 to 30 years to stop population growth. If you know the demographic statistics, you know you can't stop population growth for 100 years, and so it faces us with a very large technological problem, at least as we view it, of how do you reconcile this gap between the numbers of people and the amount of food we can produce.
La courbe qui est en bas, c'est la courbe de l'augmentation de la population.
The increase in the world's population is shown by the upward curve at the bottom of the graph. It's compared with the amount of land needed, assuming the average need, as now, is 0.8 hectares for each person. The population is increasing, and the need for arable land is increasing. The amount of land available on the surface of the earth is diminishing. The two lines cross before the year 2000.
When you have a population doubling every 35 years, there is no, I repeat, no conceivable technological way you can even dream of feeding them, of supplying them with the amenities of life or anything else. If there is a limit in how much food we can grow after 4 million years on the planet, you will be halfway to that limit only 35 years before you hit it. Let me give you a concrete example. There is an argument now about how much fish we can get out of the oceans if we do everything right. The pessimists, but most of the fisheries biologists are in that class, say you can get 100 million metric tons. There are a few fisheries biologists who are more optimistic, and they say if you can do everything right, you can get 200 million metric tons. Now, today, we get about 60 million metric tons. This means that if the lower limit is correct, 35 years from now, everyone in the world will have less fish because the population will have doubled. We will need 120 million metric tons. That is 2 times the present 60 million, and we are above the lower limit of 100 million metric tons. On the other hand, let's suppose that the optimists are right, and you can actually get 200 million metric tons. Well, 35 years later, you need 240 million metric tons, 2 times 120, and you are above the optimistic limit. Let me point out, of course, that doing everything right means you do not overfish, and it means that you do not pollute the ocean. We are doing nothing right. We are overfishing, and we are polluting the oceans, and as a result, we are not even approaching any longer the lower theoretical limit. We are moving away from it. The fisheries productivity is dropping. But this, I think, is the same thing as with the arable land. You can make any assumption you want about doubling or tripling the productivity on the average around the world. As long as the human population is growing at a 2% per annum rate at compound interest, doubling every 35 years, the difference between in your productivity makes only a difference of a few decades before disasters.
We're driving at rapidly increasing speed toward the edge of a cliff. Some people want to push down on the accelerator harder. Some people are covering their eyes. But I think there are other people in a rapidly growing number who say, look, we've got to take our foot off the throttle, put on the brakes, and turn.
It is simply not possible to practice agriculture without degrading the environment. What you must do is practice it in ways and on as small a scale as possible so that the complex natural systems are large in relation to the unstable, unnatural systems which we produce to give ourselves food. And one of the greatest problems in the world today is that as our population expands, we attempt to expand agriculture, and this very attempt degrades the life support systems upon which our very existence depends. We depend on the ecological systems of the planet for all of our food, ultimately for the quality of the atmosphere, and also for the disposal of our waste. Now, we're fortunate that the system as it evolved was very complex and therefore very stable, and that it had a certain amount of redundancy in it. But when you start pulling out elements, it's like taking diodes out of a computer. If there's redundancy, the computer may not stop after you pull out the first few, but any ecologist can assure you that if you pull out enough elements, the computer will break down. And unfortunately, in the wiping out of many different species of animals, we have been pulling elements out of the computer on which our life depends. And when somebody says, you know, what difference does the pelican make, or what difference does the bison make, or some other organism or some other population, the difference is that you are destroying your own life support system. We also know that the economists who are optimistic about being able to continually supply us with the metals and so on that we need, because they say we can always pay more and we can use atomic energy to extract them as we get lower grade ores, are not familiar with the laws of thermodynamics, because of course the limitations on the amount of minerals and so on that we can get are not set by the amount of minerals in the surface of the earth. They're set by the thermal load, the heat load put on the atmosphere by the use of energy necessary to concentrate them.
Ce n'est pas seulement le milieu physique, le milieu
It's not only physical things, natural things, which are in the process of being destroyed by the attempt to make nature produce, to make our spaceship Earth produce. We are destroying something else just as much, the human things which knit a society together. We are destroying the human spirit. In the tissues which join society, when you start producing services, you start producing at the same time a degradation of society. Society becomes an instrument, a kind of funnel for the services of education, of health, of transport. And you find that you've arrived at another sort of pollution, which we have now to take into account and which we have now to give a name for. We can't fight against pollution without discussing this form of it. This degradation of the heart, where hope is changed into longing, where the hope, the surprise of learning from someone else, is changed into expectations of goods from predictable institutions with predictable results.
We have no choice. Really, when you have a runaway growth, like a cancer, you only have two choices. Either you find a way of curtailing it and producing a steady state, or else the whole system collapses and dies. For instance, no scientist asks the question, will the population explosion come to an end? The only question they ask is how? Will it come to an end by a huge rise in the death rate, everybody dies and then it's over? Or will it come to an end because mankind finds a way through limiting birth to produce a steady state?
Est-ce que nous sommes vraiment dans une situation?
Has society really arrived at a situation of cancerous growth? Is that really the diagnosis we now have to make? You don't think that we should first concentrate on looking at society as it is?
Well, after all, in a steady state, it is not a case of everything is static and nothing changes. In a steady state, you have to have continual feedback, as we would call it, to make sure that the system remains at the proper level for the good of society, just as in your body. All of the materials are constantly turning over. Atoms and molecules come in, atoms and molecules go out and destroyed, and yet the system is dynamic.
Evolution, I think, is the key word in the steady state.
But you said, for instance, that we must give up freedoms to attain this. Well, in a sense, yes, perhaps we give up some freedoms, but we gain others. For instance, we gain the freedom to stay alive. We gain the freedom to have, once again, a quality life. In the United States, for instance, while we have had this runaway, cancerous, ridiculous economic growth, our gross national product has doubled in the last 12 years or so. The quality of our lives has plummeted, has gone down.
Are we really facing some growth which goes beyond the capacity of the system to accept it?
Oh, we already see clear signs that the system is starting to break down. For instance, we can no longer produce growth in the productivity of the sea. The world fisheries catch, which every year since 1950 had gone up, In 1969, the most recent year for which we have data, it went down. We are facing now a breakdown of the ecological systems of the planet. It may already be too late to save them, but surely if we do not act promptly, we face a global catastrophe.
Then we have to choose the parameters on which we want to act. And I think that is the thing which will be difficult for people to admit. And that's why an enormous effort in education has to be made in order to make the people go from a growth system into a steady state system in which we will pick up and choose the parameters on which we want to act. Is that right?
Absolutely. You must, for instance, change the behavior of people towards their children. Now, in most societies, the question a person asks himself is, how many children do I want? Now, a person must learn to say, what kind of life will my children be able to lead, and how many children should I have in order to make that possible? And it's a very different question. You have to consider the needs of society, and we have to change people from thinking only of themselves or of their neighbors or of their nation to thinking of the state of the entire global system.
It is not only a question of education. We have to reorganize society, production, in order to satisfy new needs. For instance, there will be a very great problem in the field of unemployment, jobs.
I think your point is very well made. The unemployment situation in the world, if you have in the United States, we estimate that almost 50% of the people are actually unemployed, not in the statistics, yes, but they do jobs that are either useless or dangerous. Whereas in underdeveloped areas, in the ECAFE region, the population is growing so rapidly that it's estimated in Southeast Asia alone they must produce 1 billion more jobs in the next 10 years simply to maintain today's level of unemployment.
Now, one of the important things we have to remember, I think, in looking for answers and technologies and approaches is that we have only begun to learn the lessons of nature. Let me come back to my silly little egg here, which is incidentally uncooked, so I hope I don't drop it. But since this egg is uncooked, it has all kinds of information in it for us. That is, the egg represents a beautiful technology on the part of nature. The hen could not carry 12 around at once, so she lays them one at a time and then adds that magic ingredient, consecutive heat, and then her little chicks here. Now, all the information that is in this egg that a chicken needs to grow up and make another egg, all the information, it's a magnificent computer, whether you like a chicken or not. And in here are bone and feathers and blood, all the necessities, and then the magic of producing another egg. But there's more than just this information in it. There is the example of the recycled system. The last thing is that it seems to me that this is really a product of wildness. It came to us. We didn't have to design an egg. It's a fortunate thing. It was designed for us, and all nature outside is designed for us. We're learning to use a little bit. And I think that one of the finest information sources we have, the answer bank for the world, is in the wildness we preserve. We can pave things anytime we want to, but when we interrupt and wipe out wildness, it is gone forever. And we're left to fend for ourselves with very little information. So I think that our planning must include room for a great deal of wildness in it, because that's where our future lies. That's where the information is. That's where there are answers to questions man has not yet learned how to ask.
I don't believe that we can really make the next step forward in a struggle against pollution before we have gained insight into its underlying nature, that it is the result of the institutionalization of values. It is the result of trying to deliver the good life, of bringing to people minimum quanta of institutionally produced goods and services instead of providing people with institutions within which they can help themselves. Technology would make it possible for us to provide people with an enormously greater power, each one of them, to heal themselves and to learn by themselves and to house themselves than they ever could before in history. But instead we have that functional shift, things which formerly were even designed with verbs, such as learning, healing, housing, moving, are now becoming substantives which are delivered by an institution.
In the United States today, we put enormous effort into the diseases of middle-aged people because the people in the legislature and the Congress who vote the money are mostly middle-aged. And so we have an enormous effort going into nonsense like heart transplants, kidney transplants, esoteric operations on the valves of the heart and taking care of cardiovascular disease and taking care of cancers and so on, in a country where we only rank something like 20th in the world, 20th from the top, in infant mortality. Now, this is an insane misuse of priorities. It's perfectly clear that in no state of human technology or population size, anything like we have now, can such things as heart transplants or kidney transplants be a real or major thing in the entire health picture of the world. This general approach to medical technology is obviously a failure, as have been many of our other approaches to medical technology problems.
If I'm right, it has produced three types of degradation. Degradation of the environment, impotence on the part of the people to grow the old foods on which now we somehow survive on subsistence economy when we become dependent on the new article which is brought in, and third, polarization, social pollution as you call it. Now I wonder why nobody sees that the same three types of degradations which are the result of an overproduction or a modern type of production of physical goods equally happen in the service sector.
This is very interesting. No one has thought about the problems that we've created by our highly specialized attempts at producing social services, the very narrow way that we've gone about it, and the fact that we've done it in ways which seem always to be inordinately expensive.
Now, if what we are just saying is right, in the service sector we are facing a phenomenon very analogous to pollution for which we have no name, which sooner or later somebody has to give a name to, because there too, when people translate learning into being schooled and healing into purchasing medical services, we become impotent as we become impotent to use old foods once new ones have been introduced.
The great danger, I think, in the kind of pollution that we're discussing now on the social side is that, for instance, you get the impression you could easily create a situation in which the only way to be healthy is to purchase the goods as presented by the Western healthcare services, which in many ways are designed not to make people healthy, or the educational system of the United States, which tells you that there is only one way to approach mathematics or one way to approach psychology and so on. So this tremendous, the more you create institutionalized delivery of services, the more you lose what I think is perhaps the most valuable resource that mankind has, and that is his cultural diversity. If you go to a university in an underdeveloped country, you will very often find the majority of the students studying such things as Western philosophy and Western poetry, and this is because these people have been told and convinced that this is the very height of human activity, when actually their own cultures may be much, as an Eskimo culture, for instance, an average Eskimo has a much richer, more interesting and imaginative cultural life than the average New Yorker or the average Parisian. He's much more a part of his culture. He's a much healthier and more intelligent human being. But the average New Yorker or the average Parisian would never believe that.
Pour moi, cette histoire de la médecine technologique est un très bon exemple.
For me, medical technology is a classic example of the change in personal services.
De l'effort de se prendre en charge,
of the way in which people are taken over by a big institution, by an industry. It's a good example of the industrialization of services. In Cuernavaca, where I live now, up to 10 or 12 years ago, most people could still die at home. Now we have better medical services, and at least for the last 5 or 10 days of their lives, almost everybody is taken to a hospital so they can die in the solitude of professional care.
Même la sépulture.
But death used to be an event, a celebration. Before, society was terrorized by death, and death became something you could not mention. Today, even to die among your friends and your children is a sign of abject poverty.
Many people do not understand that if everybody in the United States came down with terminal cancer, that our gross national product for a while would go up because of the cost of everybody taking care of each other. Perhaps the most absurd thing that has happened recently in the healthcare field in the United States is that Mr. Nixon is very concerned, you see, with cancer, because cancer is popular politically, it's popular with the Congress, and so he appropriated a very large amount of money to fight cancer. Now, if you want to fight cancer in the United States, you do it very simply. You forbid smoking, you stop having very large automobiles, you clear up the smog, you no longer have asbestos coming from brake linings, and you could do much more to reduce cancer than all of the money that is now being wasted searching madly for some magical cure which few biologists feel will ever be found.
Particulièrement, il faudrait apprendre que les pays riches.
Perhaps people should also know that in the rich countries, people are at the moment being used like animals in laboratories.
Au moins 2/3, et quelquefois même
at least 2/3, and even perhaps as much as 4/5 of all the new medicines which have come onto the North American market in the last 30 years have been withdrawn from the market during the 17 years they are protected by American law by patent rights.
Ils ont été retirés ou parce qu'ils étaient dangereux.
They've been withdrawn because they were dangerous, or because they contained poison, or because they had no real advantage over simpler and older medicines.
Et en effet, on utilise aujourd'hui l'Américain en le faisant payer.
And in fact, the American today is being made to pay
Quelles sont les médecines
to try out medicines for the rest of the world.
dans le reste de l'humanité.
The pharmaceutical companies are extremely powerful, and they, with the cooperation of a medical profession that concentrates on taking care of you once the smog or whatever else it is has made you ill, has been a major feature in turning American society and now in turning European society into societies of people that live by these pills. In other words, we get hooked on this kind of service exactly the same way, and also homologously with the way drug addicts get hooked. The two things are very closely connected.
Je voudrais bien me garder d'être interprété comme
I don't want to be thought of as a Luddite, as someone who wants to destroy machines, or who wants to talk about going backwards, about getting rid of technology.
Mais oui, je parle
But I do want to make the distinction between technology and technocracy.
D'accord.
La technologie est au service
Technology is chiefly under the control of the technocrat,
qui justifie
who justifies his control of the means of production
en rendant ces moyens
by making these means more and more complicated and creating an addiction, again as you said, very like a drug addiction, for the products which only he can produce.
de leur faire produire.
Could I give an example of this? One of the attempts that's made by the United States, particularly by our Department of Agribusiness and our government, which is run by our agricultural financial interests, is the push to try and mechanize the agriculture of India. Now, you have in India a situation now where you have a labor-extensive agriculture, where you have an enormous urbanization problem, and yet we would push on them our modern solution, which is combines and tractors and so on, which would simply make the labor situation even worse in the countryside. And of course, what ought the solution for India's agriculture, if there is one, should be in the direction of a labor-intensive agriculture. I think at the moment, when we think of the crisis of the next 30 years, the questions which come foremost to Westerners and to people concerned with this are, how can we turn our technology and sort of win through the crisis? Whereas I think at the same time we have to keep always an eye on the long view of sort of what is man for? What is a successful human being? What can we do to preserve our diversity of cultures and to try and find eventually a situation in which each human being knows where he is in his culture and is satisfactorily supporting himself in the sense of Monsieur ILLICH?
The problems fundamentally are political, problems of policies, problems of goals, and problems of values. I would like to just say the three major sins that are hosted in that spaceship Earth, looking at them as a manager who sees that the world is a classical example of gross mismanagement. The first sin is that we hope, as in the past, to deal with the different issues we have to confront as they were discrete, self-contained problems. The second major problem, sin, is that we think to reduce problems, to reduce them to our small, obsolete dimensions in institutions. The spheres of solidarity are still the nation states, which have nothing to do with this problematic that we are facing, which were logical perhaps 150 years ago, they are totally irrational. Now, the third major sin is that we are motivated only by short-term interests. We don't see longer than next presidential election, next legislation, the next budget.
The big difference between our spaceship Earth and an Apollo spaceship is that our spaceship has only passengers, no crew. If you think about an Apollo spaceship, there's a support system, there's a plan, there's a trajectory, there are all kinds of contingency plans for emergencies. The amount of food is carefully regulated to the number of people on board and so on, and there's a captain. And I think there's a good analogy here. This is what we need to do, is to convert our spaceship from one which is sort of running at random through the universe to one which is programmed on the basis of the best available knowledge, the way an Apollo is.
But how can we create the development of moderation in our control of the spaceship? How can we favor moderation? Certainly not by trying to produce things more quickly or producing intangible things like information on contraception. I promise you that there isn't a single Mexican who can't learn very quickly how to limit the size of his family if he wants to. The best proof of that is that throughout Latin America, in the towns, between 3 and 4 out of 5 conceptions are aborted.
One of the great difficulties with the situation in the world today is that it takes a certain amount of technological expertise to even perceive the problems. If the Mexicans somehow believed that the future of their children depended on them having small families, I agree with you, they would of course have small families. People around the world have always had approximately the size families they wanted. In England, in the 18th century, they did it largely by infanticide. They had institutionalized infanticide. They called it baby farm. In Latin America and in Italy today, where contraceptives are hard to come by, as you say, women have abortion. So the question is, how do you get Mexicans to perceive that it is in their self-interest to find ways, whatever ways they want, to have smaller families?
Le fait de fond est de comprendre la folie qui s'est emprise.
The basic fact we have to understand, and this is where the image of the spaceship Earth helps us, is the madness of human beings who, in limited conditions, our Earth, our patch of Earth, want to multiply, want to consume more, want to waste more and destroy other forms of life. This madness is due to the gulf between the idea of reality which we have created and reality itself. And it's also due to a loss of sense of direction. But this madness has to be cured progressively. It's impossible to create in people's hearts and minds situations which are too different from the situations we are in now. But I think that in the next decades, if we begin now, if we can define more or less in what direction we want to go, we can progressively alter the trajectory of our spaceship.
It's not difficult for technology to see what's wrong and to recommend better courses. But what is so difficult is this whole question of human institutions and human psyche and how you get people to make the right decisions. That's why I'm so afraid from our knowledge of the whale situation, because basically the Club of Rome's projections are the same as the biologists' projections on the whales. And the whaling industry was and is fighting for its survival, and yet with the technological answer in front of them, they opted for destruction rather than survival because they could not re-change their thinking. And so this again comes back to what I think I asked Professor
It's a political issue.
It's a political and a cultural issue. The solution is not this. We need technology to solve it. It is necessary but not sufficient. Somehow we must go beyond it, and if I knew the answer, I'd patent it and sell it.
Dans le monde dans lequel moi je me trouve,
In the world I live in, a large majority of the people can still be told the facts of existence about the realities of the world in fairly simple terms.
je vois que le projet d'abolir la voiture.
I quite see that the idea of abolishing the car, or rather speed,
Des gens qui voudraient abolir la voiture.
because there are a lot of people who want to abolish the car simply in order to increase speed. To abolish the car in Los Angeles, forgive me for returning to your country again, would be practically impossible. It would be even difficult politically to start discussing the problem. But I don't see why we shouldn't arrive at anti-capitalist conclusions
Dans le sens spécifique dans
in the specific sense in which I use this word, and also at anti-Stalinist conclusions
milieu de population.
among peoples who are still quite realistic because they are still quite close to the earth.
No matter what plans you have, everything fundamentally comes back down to individual action, and then to community action, and then to perhaps national action before you have international action. Now, in the area that I'm not most concerned with, but perhaps most accused of being concerned with, the question of overpopulation, I always say that overpopulation begins at home. My wife Anne and I have one daughter only. If I had 10 children, I could hardly go around the world telling people not to have more children. I've had a vasectomy, the male sterilization operation, which means that I am not going to have any more children. It does not mean, however, that I can't enjoy sex a great deal. In fact, after you've had the operation, you can enjoy it more. But I think that the same principle really of me having a vasectomy ought to be applied very strongly to the overdeveloped nations. It's the United States, as has been pointed out, above all nations, that frivolously consumes the world's resources, that uses energy for all kinds of nonsense, which is the leading promoter of the arms race, which unfortunately France seems obliged to try and imitate in her own small but unfortunately really too large way. I think it's necessary for all of us to examine our own lives and say, what can we do to move towards the sort of thing that Mr. ILLICH wants, and then to persuade our tribe, our group, and then to persuade our nation. I think that we have to hold out the big plans, but at the same time we must all think, what can we do personally ourselves, and to persuade our acquaintances, and to persuade our political systems to move in the proper directions.
Monsieur PECCEI, plus tôt, nous a exposé ses doutes.
Mr. PECCEI earlier expressed his doubts about the possibility of radical change, of sudden change.
Du management du change.
And from the point of view of the management of change, I accept that.
Mais dans certains domaines, je crois que nous arrivons.
But in certain areas, I think we are beginning to understand what sudden change means. a change of a different class, because the great changes in recent history that I know have been changes of attitude, and these changes were very sudden. Yesterday, as I was walking near here, I was thinking that at one time it would have been impossible to imagine even touching a king. And a few years later, a large proportion of the people of Paris were gathered round the guillotine. Now, in the area which we are discussing, the realization of the limits of the world, of the necessity to move from an economy of growth to a stable economy, don't you think we could spell out the choices to the people of the world to create a sudden change in our attitude towards what is possible and what is desirable? Because at the moment only consumption and activity are desirable.
May I just suggest one thing, that I think we might sell them better if we stop selling packages labeled hope that have nothing inside. And I think that such packages are the package that says science will save us, technology will find the answer, or the package that says a green revolution will give all your children all the food they need. People are not going to stop having all these children if they think that there's going to be something to sustain them. They will, I think, stop if they see that their likelihood of their having food, of their having all these things they dream of, is really not there. And that, I think, is the important thing that has to come out of meetings like this.